Okay, so now that we've uploaded the images, what we now need to do is download them. So in here, we have one image that we have uploaded and we would just want to download it into our components or the message body component. So in our code, what I want to do is if I go into the message body, we are rendering the messages in here. So what we could do is either add the image into the messages array in here and then combine the data and do it that way, or we could just create a separate images component underneath. So what I'm going to do here is create the download images component. So if I call this images, and then what you can do is you can combine them and then sort them into your own array of data. But for now, I'll just keep it as simple as possible. So images, and then if I go into the main screen, I'm going to create a new file in here called images.tsx. So what I actually will do is call it storage images, just to make sure it doesn't confuse anyone. And then RAFCE in here, and this is going to be a React functional component. And what I'm going to do is just render, this is where we render images, and all I want to do now is import this in the message body here. So control space and storage images is in there, and now all I need to do is save all. And in our application, you can see this is where we render images like so. So that's fine. What I also want to do now is start creating the functionality for this. So let's go into our storage image component, which is in here, and I'm going to create a few functions. So you could either create these functions in the storage file, so in the lib Firebase storage, or you could create them in here. It's up to you. What I'm going to do is add them in the lib Firebase storage file, and this is also going to be a use client component because we will be using use effect in here. So I'm just going to bring in the use effect, which essentially is to handle the data or the images in our case. And we also need to create this function. So const handle data is just going to be an empty function for now, like so. So now if I save, I just need to import use effect from React, and then the handle data is going to be the function name. So now that should all be fine and working correctly. And what I want to do with handle data is I want to make this an async function because we are going to be awaiting some data coming back when we fetch the data. So let's delete this console log, and I'm going to do await, and the function name is going to be called fetch images, and that is going to be defined in our storage file. So fetch images, essentially I'm going to pass in a few arguments that we need to create. So first argument is going to be something called a list ref, second one is going to be set images, and then the third one is going to be some data. And fetch images is going to take in two arguments. First one is going to be something called a list ref, and then the second argument is going to be set images, like so. So we need to create the use state for set images, which I will do just before here, and we also need to import the use state, and also the image type we need to define. So I'm just going to define that in types.d.ts, and essentially the images type is a photo URL created at type of string, and then also the message sender ID because we need that. So let me just import that in, and then handle data says makes the dependencies of the use effect hook, move it inside the use effect, or wrap it in its own use callback. So what we'll do is wrap it in its own use callback hook. So this memoizes the function and only re-renders the function when the dependencies change. So in our case, it will be the list ref, but we've not defined it yet, so we don't know what that is. And we also don't know what the fetch images is. So what the list ref is a storage reference in our storage bucket. So let's create that now. So the list ref is the ref coming from Firebase storage, like so. And what I want to do is get access to our storage and then the param.id. So when we go into our storage bucket, this param ID here is essentially what we want to use, and this is what we use to create the file name. So it's the same folder structure in here. So going back into the code, we want to import storage from our lib Firebase here, and then we also want to get access to the params ID. So let me just again get access to params is equal to use params, which is being used quite a lot in this build because everything is reliant on the params. And then the second argument is a string of params.id in here. So that is the list ref complete, and then we also need to import the use callback. And now if I save, the only thing missing now is the fetch images function. So we need to define this function, and I'll do that in the storage. So let's navigate to there now and scroll all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to create the function. So export const of fetch images. So this one is an async function, and it takes in the list ref, which is a storage reference, and the set images, which is a React state hook. So let me just import storage reference and also the image type. in here, and then we also need to close this off. And now we have our function defined. We need to do some checks in this function now. So what we want to do is find all of the items in the storage bucket. So find all of prefix and items, or you could do find all items. You essentially get access to the prefixes and the item, but what we want to do is get access to the items. So now, because this is an async function, what we want to do is there's a hook from Firebase storage which is called list all. So we want to await and we want to list all. We need to import this from Firebase, which takes in an argument of the reference or the storage reference. So in our case, that's the list ref, and then dot, then we get a response. And in that response, what we get back is a response dot items. But I want to essentially create an images array constant also. So let's create that first of all. So in here, what I want to do is const of images array. So this is where I want to add all of the images into, is equal to images type. And at the minute it's an empty array, so we'll just keep it as that for now. And then what we want to do is get access to all of the items in the response. So res.items for each, and in here what I want to do is get access to all of the items on the list ref, which is correct. So if we just delete this, and what we want to do now is create an image URL. So this is where we need to have a new function called get download URL. So this is going to be called const image URL. So what essentially we have done is we have mapped through all of the items, which what I will actually do is console log this first of all. And the item ref in here essentially is going to be a type of storage reference. So item ref will be storage reference, and that comes from Firebase storage. And we also need to close this off here. So that is all fine. And let me just quickly save this, and we need to handle the fetch images. So let's console log the item ref in here. So at the minute we should only just get the one image that is saved in our storage bucket, but if there was more, then they would fetch the multiple in there. So let's go and see our console, and we just need to refresh the page as well. So we are getting some errors saying fetch images is not defined. So we need to go into our storage images and import this in, and then we can test it out. So now, as you can see, the item ref is a storage reference in our storage from Firebase. And in here, we have access to a full path. We have the name, which essentially is the name that we give the item. So the name is, we are extracting the last part of the name out. So 1148.jpg, which is essentially the same name in here. So 1148.jpg. And that's the item ref being received as an object. So we just need to render that out. But if we just finish off fetching the image, so fetch images, at the minute we're just getting the name, but we need the download URL, the full URL path. So let's go ahead and do that now. So in here, put a comment saying get the download URL, which is the full URL path, the image. And then what I'm going to do is underneath create a constant called image URL is equal to await. So essentially we need to put this in an async here, and then await of get storage download URL. So this is the name I'm calling my function, because Firebase has its own function called get download URL, which is what we actually need. So get storage download URL in here, and what we pass in here is the item ref. So now what we need to do is define the get storage down URL as a function. So let's go ahead and do that. So export const, and we do that before, because we are using arrow functions, we need to declare it before, because we don't have the hoisting capability of a normal function. So if you did export function with the name, then it hoists up to the top levels, therefore it's accessible within the fetch images function, but I'm just declaring it before because I prefer the arrow function. So what we need to do now is create this function. So if we copy this, get export const get storage download URL, and this takes in a file name as the argument. And what I will actually do is create this as a normal function. So export async function, just to show you the variety actually. Get storage download URL, which takes in a file name, or you could call it a storage ref. And then the URL essentially is the get download URL, and we need to import this from Firebase. So I'll just import this in at the top. So it's get download URL from Firebase storage, and we are using that here. And what we also need to do is await get download URL and pass in the file name as the argument in here. And then that's uploaded at the top, and then we just return the URL here. So now we have the image URL. If I just console log the image URL this time to see if we're receiving that. So let's delete this one now and save. Now we should be getting the full URL path of the image URL. So if we refresh the page, so now as you can see, we have the full image URL in here being rendered equal to the image URL. So let's just check if that's actually working. So we can actually click on it and it opens up the image that we have in our Firestore storage. So if we go into here, that is the exact same image that we have being rendered in our storage here in our bucket. So now what we need to do is just render it out, but let's finish the function first of all. So we have access to the image URL. That's the first step. So now I want to create an object called images data. So let's just bring that in and I'm going to remove this console log. So images data is going to be this object that has a photo URL, a created at, a type which is equal to storage, a message sender ID which is whoever is sending it, so it'll be the current user. So let's get access to auth.currentuser.uid, and then the photo URL is essentially the image URL that we have defined here. The created at is the name that we looked at earlier on, and we're just splitting it so that we get everything before the full stop, so not the .jpeg, just the name itself and the time. And then the type is storage here. So now what I want to do is I want to add the images array here and push the images data into the images array like so. And then finally, we're getting access to these set images. So we just need to update that to the images array in here. So now that is all complete. What I now want to do is go back into my storage images.tsx file. In here, we just want to console log the images. So let's go ahead and do that. See the image being returned, and it should be an object that is included within an array. So let's save all. And now, as you can see here, the images are being rendered in the component here. So we have an array that contains objects of images, and there's a lot of re-rendering happening in here. So let's just fix that as well. So the re-rendering is happening all the time. So what I'm going to do is delete this because we don't need the handled data being rerun whenever it changes. We only need to handle the data when this component re-renders, so this storage image re-renders. So now all I can do is disable this. So quickly disable this, and then now if I save, this should now fix the issue. So now when I type in a new message saying, hey, as you can see, the image gets fetched again and that updates as well. So that is the images being rendered. So now the only thing left to do is render the image onto the page. So we can just copy the message component UI. So if we go into here, essentially what we can do is copy the divs, which is essentially what it is. So copy the div in here and go into our return block and just render the div first of all, and we need to map through the images as well. So images dot map, for each item in the image we want to implicitly return the div. So let's move this div up in here like so, and instead of the p tag, what we want to do is we want to have the image be rendered inside. So let's go ahead and do that, which is essentially a div inside, and the div contains an image from next image, and for each item in here, the source is going to be the item.photo URL. So now all I need to do is access the param ID once more on this page. So it'll be params.id. So this is determining whether the styling of the image is on the left or the right side of the page. So if I now save, we now have slight issues that we need to fix. So let's go ahead and fix them. So in our return block, what we want to do is have a surrounding React fragment around everything in here before we map over it like so. So now if I save, that should fix everything here. And now one final thing to do is we need to just check to see if the image is being rendered onto the page. So let's go ahead and do that. So instead of this is where we render the images, now what will happen is the image should render. So now this is a good sign because what's happening is we're using the next image component, and now we need to update the host name in our next config.js file. So let's go ahead and do that. So in our next config.js, just add another URL of Firebase storage.googleapis.com, which means that we're getting an image from Firebase storage. So when we make a change to our next config, we need to restart the server again. And now all we do is refresh the page. And now, as you can see, we have our image being rendered onto the page as well. So now what you can do is you can combine both components that we have in our message body. So that is the messages and storage images, and you can combine them into one component, and therefore combining the data sets for the data in the data list, i.e. all of the messages, and the storage images, so the images array as well, putting it into one data array, and then you can kind of sort it by the timestamp or the created at, which is what we have created. But anyway, that is everything complete in this application. We have covered quite a lot. So we have covered Firebase login and authentication. We have covered Next.js 13. We have managed to create our Firestore database and along with the Firestore storage as well, all using Tailwind UI and many of the features that we have gone through in this application, along with TypeScript as well. I hope you enjoyed this build. I also have ebooks available on my website that I have created. There are 3 at the minute that I have that hopefully will help you improve and become a better front-end developer in general. I cover a range of topics in them ebooks, and there's more information on my website and the link is below. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this build and learnt a lot from it, or at least something from it, and please like and subscribe, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next one.